much for joining us today for this very important conversation. I'm here gathered with a couple of Howard University students who represent very different ethnic backgrounds and, more importantly, the African diaspora. So, I have two words for you all today, Diaspora Wars. Like, what do those words mean?
I think for me, it just means the deeply rooted nonsense because of colonization, if that makes sense. I think colonization created a whole web of ignorance about each other, about our interpersonal relationships, about where we come from, about who we are. And I think moving into the future that we live in now, we've all inherited so much of that nonsense. And so the wars, I think, are us untangling that in our own weird Gen Z millennial way.
I think something that's really important is learning from each other and making sure that we're all constantly understanding that we're all reflections of the same ancestor and we're all basically the same culture. We all just express it differently, but Latinos are Latinos in Africa, in the Caribbean, in New York. We are all one and the same. So I think exposing each other or ourselves to one another and learning how we're all connected is something that's really important. Understanding how we can stop the diaspora wars, quote unquote.
I think to stop the diaspora wars, I think it's definitely you have to expose other people to it. But I just traveled to Ghana, and I know being in that space and actually being in the culture and seeing what we were taking it from. Because I'm African American, I'm from Chicago. But I have a lot of roots in the South, so I think, and especially now in the global space, if you look at the history of the Pan-African movement, the thing that stopped them was a lot of outside forces, but the thing that we have now is the internet and social media and stuff like that, so we can get in each other's virtual spaces, folks can talk to folks from anywhere in the world, and you can see those mirrors that she was talking about earlier, because once you see that, you'll just be like, oh yeah, that's me. That's me, that's me, that's me, that's me. And you can see the effect of colonization across the board. And education is really important too. It's really the great separator in how we understand each other. And when we understand that everybody was kind of thrown in this pit and then thrown all across the world, then we can kind of have a better understanding of how we can move forward.
I don't think ignorance is new, so definitely social media is playing a new role in it, but it is deeper than I think our modern time. And I'm Liberian, my family is indigenous to Liberia, and I recently learned, so some back history, I believed, and most people in Liberia believe, that the African Americans who traveled back there went there knowing that they were going there to colonize Liberia. And I recently learned that a lot of the people who came from Liberia, a few of the people from actually Baltimore, which is very close to here, were forced onto those ships because the American Colonization Society paid for those ships. I'm 22 years old. I learned that a couple months ago. This is not public knowledge, it's for Liberians to learn or African Americans to learn. There was no knowledge of that. So in me not knowing that, in my head there was a vilification for those Americo-Liberians who, hurt people as recent as my father, who's 60-something years old. So imagine if everybody in Liberia knew that, this beef we have between ourselves in our little country is also rooted in colonization.
Our next question, I would say, how do you think that labels, because I know, like you said, in Latin cultures, the word negro, negra, black cultures, how we confer with ourselves, using different words. How do you think certain titles like light skin, dark skin, prieta, all these things, how do you think that separates us or, maybe unify us? I'm not sure, however you feel.
So I think, I think those different terms that are used specifically in English, and when you're talking about light skin, dark skin, and different labels on different types of black people and different appearances. I think in English, a lot of times people try to do a direct translation into Spanish and they're like, oh my God, that's so racist. Why do you guys talk like that and stuff like that? But I think oftentimes there's also differences that I think need to also be appreciated. And even if you don't understand it, have a little bit of curiosity and do a little digging, talk to somebody. Because sometimes there are terms that are directly translated from English to Spanish that are more terms of endearment. And it's not necessarily that I look at you as just black and white, But I look at you, especially there's an issue with like nationalism in different countries as well, where like, for example, like you're just Cuban or you're just Dominican. But I think those labels have different meanings in different cultures, and that should be looked at as more than just what's racist, what's a slur, and what's not when you're talking about Black people, because it's only in our community that you see stuff like that going on, and that sort of prejudice. But yeah.
So, okay, so I know you all have probably seen on social media, you know, the beefs, the whoever, you know, whoever you want to put into that. How can we atone for some of that hurt? Because it's not all on social media. You know, I know a lot of you probably heard, you know, a lot of African people say, oh, well, I was called an African booty scratcher, you know, when we were in school, or I was bullied, or y'all treat me like this. Or an African American person might say, oh, you know, I felt this or that. Those experiences are all so valid, but how do we move forward? How do we atone for the hurt? How do we acknowledge that and move forward as a community?
I was exposed to Diaspora Wars in middle school because I went to elementary school in Namibia, which is where I'm from, and we didn't have Diaspora Wars in Namibia. But I think that because it started so early, it started like in middle school and high school. I see it here on campus, in person. I think it's a very childish thing to partake in. And people say things out of hurt, right? So I think that if we all take on an attitude of love and remember that, like, love, Bell Hooks defines love as like nurturing somebody else's spirit. So if we take into account that we've all spoken to each other in ways that we shouldn't have, and that white people have done that as well, and that it's because of them, and we just try to build community with each other with love at the center, I think that we can move forward.
I think that's a reason a lot of people come to Howard, is like choosing HBCU because of the experiences that they've had. And I think just to hold space for each other, you know, everyone says like being Black isn't a monolith. So I think when you see someone being Black in a different way than you, to like be open to that and to listen to them and that. And I think recognize it as a distraction. You know how Toni Morrison said like racism and distraction? I think diaspora is like also part of that.
I definitely want to build on like the idea of involving love in the solution, because it's really important to take time to understand like how those experiences affected other people, or like the people who experienced them, and understanding how that's shifted the way they perceive the world around them, and figure out how maybe we can alter that perception. Like, hey, I understand that you're hurting, but look at what's happening here. Like, look at how we can fix this and build from this and become stronger from this, instead of using that as a platform to continue to hurt one another or continue to perpetuate the quote-unquote diaspora war that's going on.
Yeah, and I would say that love is a very expansive thing. Love comes in two ways, self-love and love for others. And when you even dive into learning more about your own history, you start to discover about yourself. And when you discover about yourself, you're able to better commune with people around you. And so it's such a revitalizing act to dedicate yourself to love yourself, and to love others. And I think that like the ways to come across and to like overcome diaspora wars is to continue to build community. In community, we challenge each other, right? In community, we also mourn together, we cry together, we laugh together, we rejoice together, and we're able to push each other a little bit further. If like I wasn't able to sit in this space and hear about the things that gone down in Liberia, right, and the history behind that, I may have never received that information, I may have never read that book, but because I chose to come into community to speak about this issue, like that was something that was able to be brought to me. And so definitely think that we need to continue to like focus on community and bringing love at the center. And also understanding that when we love, we're helping ourselves and also helping the world.
Yeah, and then I mean, like you all are saying, the love of it all, understanding that we truly are an African family, that, you know, we are displaced people from many different parts of the world, and, you know, really recognizing that. So I guess my last question for you all today would be, I mean, you all chose to go to an HBCU, the premier HBCU, Howard University, you know? So, I mean, how big of a role do you think that has played into your, you know, understanding of yourself, understanding of others around you, like how y'all been speaking of? And then would you encourage the next generation to follow in the steps you have? And like, do you think those opportunities would be for them as well?
Yeah, I can go first. I was born and raised in Queens, New York City. New York is the most segregated school system in the entire nation, and so I was often the darkest person in the classroom. In my middle school yearbook, people wrote to me telling me that I should go back to picking cotton, and I've experienced the microaggressions up and down the list, being in those predominantly white spaces, being deemed an academic person, an intellectual person, top class, honors, gifted and talented. But all of those ideas really contributed to me trying to liken myself to whiteness. As an Afro-Dominicano, I definitely was one of the Dominicans that was like, I know black, I Dominican. And coming to an HBCU and also wanting to come to an HBCU was something that I wanted to be able to really understand more of my African roots and what does that mean for me and what is the linkage between Afro-Latinidad. You can be African and you can be from a Latin American country. Black people speak Spanish, y'all. And so just being able to come to an HBCU has been so monumental for me. And with I've had the privilege and opportunity to serve as the president of the Afro-Latina org here on campus. The name of the org is Shango. And being able to just usher in an era of programming wherein we're building community, centering love, and really trying to raise awareness about our culture is the most beautiful thing that we've been able to do. And I would have only been able to do that at an HBCU. I didn't want to go to PWI to fight. I didn't want to be a part of just the Latino Students Unidos and the Black Student Union. I wanted to find a place where I can be both, and both would be celebrated. And I think that being in community with other people also brings you indifference. And so just as if you come to an HBCU, you'll learn about things that you've never seen. You'll talk to people from cultures that you've never experienced. And you'll also be in community with people that look like you and then have experienced similar things as you. And so why not?
I'd recommend Howard University. I recommend HBCUs, of course. We do have our struggles. But definitely I think Howard has done a great job of making the African person, no matter where that person comes from, the center of the narrative here, especially in the history departments, which have been especially transformative for me. So if you are looking to go deeper and go darker, you should come to Howard, go to HBCU.
Coming to Howard was one of the most life-transforming things I've ever done. I'm from, like I said, I'm from Chicago, but Chicago is also very segregated, like New York. And being in Chicago, like I didn't go to school with white folks until I was like in 6th grade. So I basically grew up around all black people my whole life, but I got to experience like different ranges of black folks, but here it's like a worldwide type of black folks. So I'm really appreciative of that and just learning people's different experiences. You meet people from everywhere in the world, every type of background, and it really does make you have a different understanding of self, and it makes you grow as a person if you're open to it. That was a thing that I think a lot of people, you know, you're so closed-minded and you have to kind of force yourself to get out of that bubble, because if you don't, then Howard, I feel like, kind of forces you to get out of that bubble. And being a art major, a painting major specifically, Howard has definitely opened the door with studying African descendant or descendants of, you know what I'm trying to say. But I get to study a lot of black painters, basically, black artists across the diaspora that's really hit it everywhere. And these are people, when I was at a PWI, I didn't get to study them. Like I had to beg and plead to see what type of books they can get, and they were understanding, but it's only so much shit that they can give you, you know? So being here, instead of learning about like a Picasso or a Van Gogh, I get to learn about like a Norman Lewis or Aaron Douglas. So stuff like that I really appreciate.
coming to HBCU feels like a space where I'm allowed to be myself in my entirety. So not just Puerto Rican, not just African American, but Afro-Latina, a biology student, someone who likes to party, someone who likes to do everything, and I can do it in this space and be celebrated in my ideas and in my creativity and my studies and everything that I want to be. This is the place where I feel I can be freest in being that. So being at an HBCU is like when I was hearing about HBCUs, they were saying like, oh, it's like a home, but I didn't really understand it. But being towards the end of my career at Howard University, I'm at a place where I understand what they mean, where this is a place where you can understand what it's like to be Black in a place that will celebrate your Blackness.
I know why I came to an HBCU. I guess I feel like now, later on in my career, like, I feel like I've kind of been in this bubble. Although I did feel like I found home, like, with Shango, with that Afro-Latina org, and I love the people there. It's like, I grew up around a lot of African-American people. I grew up not knowing really who I was, to be honest, and not really understanding that. Well, I guess I did know who I was, but I don't know. I guess now it just kind of feels like a strange place a little bit, being in such a very overly Black bubble, when outside of this, I feel a little bit more like myself almost, because I'm able to just not have to talk about Blackness, or not have to just, like, I guess somewhat prove that I'm for, like, the community. I don't know how else to say it, and it sounds strange coming out of my mouth right now, but I know what I'm talking about. And when I'm in different spaces where I don't have to talk about being Black, they just know it, and we just exist like that. But here, it still feels like, and it could just be me, that I'm trying to just still somehow prove that I don't have a closed mindset, which is something that's associated with Dominican Republic in general. And I think because I'm so proud of like where my family comes from, and then when it comes out and then people come back with, oh, I know Black, I Dominican, I take it the wrong way, and I feel very closed in, like, okay, I don't really belong here, and I don't fit in. I'm not really Afro anything, I'm Dominican, like they said I am. So sometimes being in an HBCU is overwhelming, and it's strange, and it doesn't feel like home, and it makes me want to go back to Florida sometimes.
I mean, do you feel like you have had to prove it since you've been to Howard, like more than you had to do so in Florida, when it's like more accepted, like to be like, you know?
I've always had to prove it. I've always had to tell people that, like, no, I am Black. Like, but it sounds weird, because, like, why do you need to prove that? Like, what's so wrong with just being where I'm from? And, like, even though a lot of my family, even they're closed-minded, like, why does that even matter if I'm here right now and I support what's going on?
At Howard, you feel like you have to say, I'm Black, I'm Black, I'm Black, when sometimes you really just want to say, I'm Dominican. Like, you can see clearly I'm Black. Is that what you're saying?
Like, yeah, like, sometimes I just want to be okay with, like, being proud, like, hey, I'm Dominican. And it's not like, oh, she thinks she's special, or she thinks she's this, or, like, or she thinks she's a different, I'm sorry.
Or that she thinks she's a different type of Black, because that's not the case at all. I'm just very proud of my culture. I love my culture down. But in the same token, like, it shouldn't have to be like I'm proving I'm down with Black people. Like, am I not also? So I don't know. It's a very complicated subject, and I guess that's, for me, Diaspora Wars are amplified at an HBCU in my eyes. And coming from the experiences I come from, which is different from a lot of people here who are like, oh, I grew up around white people, and you didn't say that though. You didn't. You said the opposite too. But like some people that I've met, they're like, oh, I've been around a bunch of white people. When I come here, I found community. For me, it's like I've been around a bunch of African American, a bunch of Black people, and it's like I always felt out of place to some degree, because like I'm assimilating to that culture when it still doesn't feel home to me. I love it, and I love all types of culture, just Caribbean, African, everything, but it's nice to be able to stand in my culture and it be appreciated, and people also feel like, dang, I love what you guys do, or they want to learn a little bit about what we're talking about and the language and just that. And I guess that's why Shango is so beautiful to me, because people come in to take part in that, and we don't have to have this discussion. We don't have to talk about any of the stuff that we're talking about here, because it's just about the culture and taking part in it. And
I had a different answer, but just adding on to what you were saying, I felt that I grew up like half of my life in Namibia, and when I do my Howard intro here, I always say I'm from Michigan, and just Michigan. And like recently I've been integrating the by way of Namibia, but I've also felt that it's perceived as like wanting to be special or like wanting to be different in some way.
people that are not from, especially in America, like people that are not from the United States, they get fetishized for that. So when you're in a black space and you're claiming a nationality over just saying, oh, I'm from this state or whatever, it becomes like, I feel like it becomes like you're trying to like separate yourself and draw that line that like, I'm not like y'all.
Well, I was gonna like say being diaspora at Howard, I think, is a lot of pressure. Like you feel like you have to represent all the time when you're supposed to represent yourself first. And I can speak to like intersectionality, like being Muslim and being black at Howard. I found a space where I can be Muslim and be black, and I don't have to choose one or the other. So I feel like it's wrong to feel like you have to choose to represent one or the other.
I hope a lot of people that I know, their view is like, when we say these things, we're saying it in celebration, like we're acknowledging our differences, but not acknowledging it to say it as a divisive tool, but as like a celebratory and unifying tool. Like, we're different and it's beautiful, and like, I'm from this country, let's talk about it. I'm from this country, let's learn about it. Like, we're different and it's gorgeous. Like, it's mind-blowing to learn and see how different we are. I'm sad to hear that you feel like you have to fight for your difference, because it should be celebrated in every space that you go into. And like, I feel like that shouldn't be something that you should be fighting, or you should be like having to be in the center of feeling closed in about, but like, other people need to open their experiences and open like the way that they view our differences within our culture or within our Black diaspora.
Both of you, what you said inspired me to talk about being like Liberian and at Howard. I always hear, well, aren't they really just African Americans in Africa? And that is the most reductive thing that I hear all the time. Like, my people are real. My people fought against that. The Bassa people, my father's Bassa, my mother's Gribbo, they fought against that. So there's always a drowning out of, sometimes I feel too, specificity. Your case is specific, my case is specific, and that is beautiful, that's real. And as long as we continue to make black, like when we talk about being black, this monolith, which I do think that we are guilty of at Howard too, and then it's always gonna be like, people are always gonna feel on the outskirts of that.
When it comes to issues of like, people will say like black on black crime or like diaspora wars, like black people getting on each other, I ultimately point the finger at white supremacy as the thing that has pitted us against each other and brought us to this space where we feel like we have to be one thing or the other, where we have to like identify in one way, and like our cultures are stripped of us, right? And so it's such a complex and such a like massive recipe and a thorough recipe for the destruction of the black body wherever the black body is. And I think that like, yeah, there's a sense of belonging and a sense of otherness that exists, and we can overcome that just by educating each other, being in spaces with each other, and immersing each other in like our culture and our experiences.
I feel like understanding the culture, people are just trying to justify like and rationalize over generations like what has happened to them. You know, everybody got spread out all across the world, and it's like, generationally, how do you come up with an explanation for why this has happened to you? Why have you been taken from your land? why have you been pillaged, exploited, all these things, and those are all the negatives. And what I love about Black people is we find the positive and then the joy in all these situations. So when we get to Howard, and like I said about like closed-mindedness, open-mindedness, that type of thing, it's like it takes time for people, you know. People have to get to a point where they're like, you know, maybe I'm just gonna open up. Like when you started Shango, you didn't start Shango, did you? You revitalized it. So when you had this club that really became a community on its own, you got to a point where you're just like, oh no, it needs to be here, you know? So it's like, I think that has to be, everybody has to have that moment, and it's gonna be in different type of respects. And I guess just closing out, I feel like with Blackness and education, Howard and higher education is a space where we have to do it. And when we're under-resourced and but we have the knowledge, we have to put the extra effort in to really educate the masses on what it is and what is happening.
Well, I mean, like you all are saying, it's about love, it's about community, respecting all of the different cultures that we all have created, that our ancestors, you know, once they were spread out, they didn't just do nothing, you know, for all those years. They created different dance styles, different music styles, different foods. And I feel like we kind of have a VIP pass as Black people. We can go anywhere, you know, and enjoy all those different things because we are part of that family, that larger family. So thank you all for being vulnerable, for speaking so openly, and, you know, just having this conversation today. I've really appreciated it. Thank you all so much for tuning in for this video. This is a very important conversation that we're having here at Howard University, and we hope that we can inspire you all to have these conversations in your neighborhoods, in your schools, and in your communities.